Greetings everyone and welcome to this episode of Fanfic Read Through. As I was reading this, my cat was laying on my arm, so I couldn't do any editing. Instead, I kept reading chapter by chapter. So when I finally got my arm free and got back to the editing, I didn't really know where the cut was between this chapter and the last one. So I ended up editing both, and when I was coming to the end of this, I realized that, hey, wait a second, I was on chapter 16 last. Where did chapter 17 go? So I had to go back and find the exact spot where the chapters merge. So with that said, actually, why is that important? Probably isn't. Anyways, here we go. Ghost Crime, chapter 18. Agent Giroux collapsed behind the ghost boy, and Louis went to her side, pressing 2 fingers to her throat, checking for a pulse. "She's alive," she said, turning Giroux over and checking her breathing. "Jennifer," she said, clapping her cheek lightly. Lowering his gun, Rossi went over to his downed agent. "Jennifer, wake up. JJ, come on." He gripped her shoulder, shaking her lightly. The rest of the group lowered the weapons, taking care of the wounded. "Ow, ow, ow," complained Tucker, holding his right arm close to his chest as he got up, Sam examining the injury. "Stop complaining," she said, taking off her backpack and bringing out an extra-large first aid kit. "Here," she handed it over to Agent Prentice, who had bent down to help Luke, the man's leg bent at an odd angle. "Sure, I tell you to stop complaining the next time you get a 104-pound ghost falling on top of your arm," growled Tucker, as Sam dug in his backpack for the first aid kit he always carried. "Thanks, by the way, you could have gone intangible or something," he shouted at his friend. Giroux coughed and opened her eyes. "There you are," said Louis, relief flowing over her as she helped her friend sit up. Lifting a hand to her ear, Giroux touched the blood. "What?" She looked confused at her co-workers and their relieved faces. "What just happened?" she asked, and her eyes fell on the back of Phantom. Scrambling to her feet, Giroux fell back on her ass, unable to keep her balance. "Take it easy, he's a friend," said Rossi, giving Giroux a helping hand. She looked at him in confusion, and then touched her ears again. "I can't hear you," she said, but she got the meaning of what Rossi had said. Rossi nodded. "We'll get you to hospital," he said, and looking at the ghost boy for the first time since he'd cut the killer shadow. "You can take us back to our time, can't you?" He got no response. The ghost just stood there, completely still, apart from his hair that was moving in a non-existing soft breeze. His hat had fallen off during the fight. "Phantom," said Louis, touching the ghost's arm, feeling cold. Danny visibly shivered, and his eyes turned to the hand touching him before going to the person it belonged to. Dr. Lewis could see the hunger in the green eyes, and she moved back, taking her hand away from him, suddenly afraid. The sweet taste of fear was on Danny's lips, and he licked them. His teeth that had grown sharp since he gotten his powers felt too large in his mouth. He wanted more of that sweet taste. He needed more of it. "Hey, Phantom, what's wrong?" asked Rossi, still supporting the dizzy Giroux. Turning his head, Danny's eyes landed on the older man and the injured and weak Giroux. They would be easy. They trusted him. They owed him for saving them. She owed him for saving her twice, and he knew exactly what he wanted. Shifting his balance, Danny turned to face the 3 agents, playing with the thought of how he should do it. Should he begin with the old man? Most likely he was leathery and hard to break, but it would taste all the more sweeter when he finally did. Or the injured agent. Her defenses were down, and she was weakened from the fight. An easy meal. Maybe the doctor would be an interesting diversion, though on second thought she would just be like the injured one. "Phantom," warned Rossi, taking another step back, reaching for the phantom plasma gun attached to his belt. Sam and Tucker looked over as they heard Danny's name being repeated. "What's going on?" asked Luke, and Prentice looked up from where she was splinting his leg. "I don't know," began Sam, turning to the friend. "Oi, Danny!" she called, getting the hungry green eyes on her. Danny had heard Sam call, and his attention was drawn to her, and then the bittersweet taste of pain coming from them. He rolled his neck, debating who to go for first. Who would be the easiest to break, and who would be the tastiest to break? Sam and Tucker both froze as Danny's eyes shifted from brilliant lime green to crimson red. Prentice and Luke didn't miss the teenager's reaction and pulled up their phantom guns, aiming them at Danny. "Phantom," said Rossi, still backing away from him, reaching the others with Louis. "What are you doing? Stop it." The fog was coming back to obscure them as frosts gathered around Danny's feet. Licking his lips, Danny started walking forward, his eyes fixed on Rossi. The leathery old man was going to be the first. "Danny, your eyes are red," shouted Sam, raising the phantom peeler, leveling it on him. Something inside Danny clicked, and he stopped dead in his tracks, eyes moving over to Sam. His eyes were red? That must be a joke, and yet Sam would never joke about his eyes changing color. They did that when he was angry, going from blue to green in his human form. Every time his eyes had been red, he'd hurt people, too many, because of him, be it because Freakshow was controlling him, or because he was an evil future version of himself. Red had always been bad. Something inside Danny screamed, annoyed that he bothered with something as small as the color of his eyes changing, when a meal laid in front of him, practically ripe for the taking. He just had to cut them down with his sword, and he would have everything he wanted. All he had to do was satisfy the hunger he'd been ignoring all this time. Then his eyes shifted from the people in front of him down to his right hand, and realization dawned. "Oh crap," he muttered, and closed his eyes, focusing on the screaming voice inside of him. His stomach twisted in disgust. He could practically taste the sour malice, and wanted to throw up at the thought of following the suggestions. "No, I will not hurt them," he thought, forcing himself to think of other things. They needed to get home to their own time. They needed to deal with a dead body in the back street, and they needed to deal with Freakshow and Lydia's tattoos. His hatred towards Freakshow flared. It would be great to give Freakshow a show of his power, to make the small man tremble in fear, to make him suffer, tearing apart molecule by molecule. Yes, that'll work, thought Danny, concentrating on his hatred towards Freakshow, lifting his eyes to the others, not sure what they would do. Rossi glanced over at Tucker and Sam. Both had been holding their weapons on the ghost boy, fear evident in their posture. They had wavered when Danny took a heavy step away from them, a mixture of fear, disgust, and panic on his face, and then he had closed his eyes. They had stayed quiet, exchanging looks, until the ghost boy looked back at them, uncertainty in his green eyes. "Danny," said Sam, before swallowing. "You okay?" His shoulders sinking, Phantom shook his head. "No," he said, bending down to pick up the second half of the sword cane. "What's going on?" asked Rossi, noting that the frost that had been forming around the boy was slowly melting. "Cutting the Ripper Ghost might not have been such a good idea as I thought," said Phantom, putting the sword back in its sheath. Rossi lowered his gun. "You need to explain yourself a bit better than that. It looked like you were thinking of eating us." Shaking his head, Danny walked towards his friends, looking like he could use some rest and an ice pack on his bruised face. He stopped beside his friends and looked over at Rossi, the hunger back in his eyes once more. "Because I were," he growled. End of chapter 18.